Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we respond to your questions on history, political philosophy, politics, governance, political culture, all those things that are involved in trying to get peace, order, and good government back on track in this country.
Ha ha ha, good government. That's a fun one considering this question, which comes to us from Matthew. It's about the money and the budget. And he's been looking around at the last 7 years of spending, seeing that spending, even under the Harper Tories, increased in this country, public spending, more than revenues, but not nearly as badly as this last Liberal budget, where he, according to the numbers he's seen, there's about $28 billion in new spending, which is more, he says, than the previous 7 years combined, without revenues going up nearly as much as they should in order to balance the budget. And his question really is, the last time something like that happened, what happened?
A splendid question. A number of things happened, all of them bad. The first one was that we started to get these budgets. This is famously in the Mulroney and Mazankowski years that would show, spending going up, revenue lagging, deficits getting bigger, and then about 3 years out, a miracle would happen, and suddenly spending would come under control due to the wisdom of the people in office who couldn't make it happen now, but sure would later, and revenue would start to rise thanks to all their wonderful policies, and the deficit would go away. And this thing kind of moved as the calendar moved, so it was always 3 years off in the future. And then what happened is debt got out of hand, interest rates went up, it became almost impossible to service the debt, the country came near to hitting the wall, and you got under the Liberals, it was Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, not in their first but in their second budget, suddenly going, holy cow, we really need to do something, and starting to cut more or less at random. And what they did was, actually, it's a little unkind to say at random, they managed to get the low-hanging fruit, including transfers to the provinces. They weathered the crisis, but they didn't deal with the structural problem of people wanting more and more from the state and being less and less willing and less able to pay for it, relatively speaking. They postponed the crisis, same kind of thing that Ralph Klein did in Alberta. One of the things they couldn't avoid, but they could push off the problem until it got much closer, was the demographic problem, that the populace is aging and have more retirees, fewer working people, relatively again, and older people place more demands on the state, both in the pensions they think they've earned from the government, though they haven't really paid it enough, and the healthcare system. So we are headed straight back into this nightmare. And the thing about the Harper Tories is that they did their big spending hike in 2009. Spending went up something like $40 billion. It was quite an extraordinary business. And they then did something else, which I really dislike. They put more and more money into so-called tax expenditures. And this is just spending. The government gives you money from somebody else if it likes what you're doing, but it's disguised as a tax cut. So it looks as though government isn't getting bigger nearly as fast as it is. Both spending and revenue seem to be lower than they are because of this jiggery-pokery, which now accounts, federally and provincially, for over 10% of GDP. Government's a lot bigger than it looks. There's a Macdonald-Laurier Institute video you should have a look at that I helped them work on that really underlines just how enormous government has become. And now we're back to fatuous budgeting. Well, you know what? We have seen this video before, and it always ends the same way, and it always ends badly.
All right, let me ask you something different. Is there anybody in Canada, the United States, Britain, anywhere, I don't care, a good government that actually budgeted properly, that did not do any of those stupid things that you keep talking about? Is there anybody out there in our recent or more or less recent history that did this right?
Hey,
do we have to go back to Calvin Coolidge?
We have to go back to Calvin Coolidge. I want to crank the bar down because there are governments in this country that are balancing the budget. There aren't very many. They're doing it in BC, which at least gives you kind of honest accounting in the short run. But all of them are understating the problems. The unfunded liabilities and things like the healthcare system, the government pension, the amount that government owes to its own employees, because you can bet the people who are close to that big pile of money in the Treasury are grabbing themselves big handfuls from both front and back pockets. But when a whole lot of public servants are retired and are expecting to live with pensions as generous as the average Canadian's working salary, and the money starts to run dry, we're going to have something of an intergenerational crisis. And these things are bad. I'm not looking forward to this. But really, citizens have discovered that their vote is the key to the public treasury. And until we stop voting ourselves boodle and pretending we've earned things we haven't, the politicians, they're not leading the parade. They're just marching in front of it. It's the mass of people beating the drums, blowing the bugles, and waving the banners who are creating momentum. And that's John and Jane Q. Public. In this sense, once again, rebellion must involve an element of repentance, as G.K. Chesterton says, because the politicians pander. And you know who they're pandering to? The people we see in the mirror in the morning.
Yeah, we have seen the enemy, and he is us.
Exactly.
All right.
Don't
I didn't want to hear
my
that.
subsidy.
I didn't want to hear that. All right, but, if it's the truth, we have to hear it. Anyway, thanks for that, folks. If you want to play along, the URL on your screen will take you to the page where the instructions are if you want to ask your question of the professor. Thank you, and see you next time.